I think biotech and age-related diseases are an industry of the most added value. So I think that as a society, this is basically the biggest thing that we need to solve, right? We were able to put together, I think, one of the most potent, if not the most potent, scientific advisory boards in the industry because we happen to know pretty much the best minds out there. And so we ended up with essentially, I think, an absolutely stunning combo of deal access and access to the right people. This is how LongeVC was essentially born as a venture capital fund.
This episode of Levity is brought to you by Vitalism Foundation.
Vitalism Foundation is a non-profit with a revolutionary mission to achieve unlimited lifespans in peak health.
You should really join us. Follow the link in the description below. Sergey Jakimov, welcome to Levity.
Thank you for having me.
For those who might not be familiar with you or LongeVC, can you just briefly share your journey? How you got started in longevity science and venture capital, and what drove you to start LongeVC?
Yeah, sure. So the journey was actually a pretty long one. I'll start with the fact that there are three partners in the fund, right? So three of us started LongeVC as first-time fund managers, essentially. This is how LongeVC came about as a venture capital vehicle. We did come into biotech and kind of the field of age-related diseases in our own different ways. So one of my partners, Gary, has essentially emerged as one of the, I think, most successful business angels in this space, actually. So he has funded in silico medicine back in the days in their seed round, did a bunch of other early stage investments, a few exits already. So he came into longevity space through angel investing, right, and using his own money to support early stage tech. Our third partner, Ilya, so he had a financial career. So he ended up being a board member for the largest private bank in the Baltics. And at some point he quit and and he was always interested in biotech and age-related diseases specifically. So he started to invest himself and joined us at some point. Myself, I came into the play as a founder. So I started my first company, a deep tech company, at the age of 22. I started my first biotech company at the age of 24. And I always wanted to end up in age-related diseases and biotech in a broader understanding of this word. And the reason for that was very, very simple and almost too picturesque to be true. I think biotech and age-related diseases are an industry of the most added value. So I think that as a society, this is basically the biggest thing that we need to solve, right? It's not fintech or any other things. It's actually this. So after my biotech company was in medical devices, I spent another 3 years working with essentially early stage, preclinical stage company founders, where I joined as a non-executive director. I helped them fundraise. I helped them transition from preclinical to clinical through IND. And we did a bunch of work for age-related diseases focused companies specifically, so cancer, neuro, cardiovascular. Raised quite a bit of money, I think overall around 70 million for a bunch of folks. Then we met with Gary at some point, and we started a third company. What was my third co-founded company? So we started it together with Gary and one other co-founder, which is called Longenesis, and that was a data play in the pharma space. So we basically were the first ones in the industry to figure out how to tap into anonymized metadata from clinics or any other patient custodian institutions, and use that anonymized metadata without infringement of any privacy rights to locate patients for clinical trials in a much faster way. So we basically streamlined recruitment, we streamlined identification of patients in specific, sometimes rare disease areas, and we cut very significantly, actually, we cut the recruitment process for big study sponsors, right, which can sometimes take up to 2 years, and obviously quite substantial amounts of money. Since then, we did this, we saw another need, and we expanded into being, I think, one of the first companies in Europe providing electronic consent management for patients. And we ended up essentially working with, I think, top 5 big pharma, all top 5 big pharma, few governments, including guys like government of UAE, for example. So yeah, Longenesis grew. And then at some point, in the year 2021, so LongeVC won the first fund as vintage 2021. We kind of all came into the point where we had deal access, and we kind of we had two components that a venture fund should have, a successful venture fund should have. One is proprietary deal access, and the other one is essentially access to intellect, right? So access to IQ and to the right people. So on the deal access side, we've built relationships throughout the years with pretty much major both academic institutions, longevity specific institutions such as Buck and the other folks, as well as much larger venture capital firms, both private as well as VC arms of pharma. So we were invited into deals and we had access to deals. And then on the other hand, we were able to put together, I think, one of the most potent, if not the most potent, scientific advisory boards in the industry, because we happen to know directly or through another board member pretty much the best minds out there. And so we ended up with essentially, I think, an absolutely stunning combo of deal access and access to the right people. And this is how LongeVC was essentially born as a venture capital fund. And it was born around the notion of supporting early stage companies, so mostly preclinical companies if we're talking about therapeutics, or pre-A to around A if we're talking about kind of infrastructure and diagnostics, with a sole focus in excellence in scientific due diligence. So absolutely most of our resource, absolute majority of our resource is spent on scientific due diligence and excelling in being able to evaluate the translatability of science, the potential, the potential market uptake, et cetera, et cetera. So most 95% of our time is actually looking into science and trying to understand whether it will work. So that's kind of the brief history about how we ended up there and what we have right now.
Your personal interest in longevity, where does that come from?
So many things, right? Longevity is a bit of a broad term. And to be completely honest, I don't really like it, if I'm being frank, right? Because it is A, overabused, B, it doesn't really mean much anymore, right? So it's just a catch-all kind of umbrella phrase to put a lot of things under one roof. Personally, I never became an MD. I wanted to become a neurosurgeon when I was in my teenage years. I didn't have the opportunity, I mean, financially, and I grew up in a village, so in Latvia, so I didn't have the opportunity to do it, unfortunately. So I tried to get into the industry through being a founder, right, and through kind of trying to identify the resources that I need to become a founder. So that's one. The other one, it is my actual belief that, okay, let's use longevity for the time being. That's longevity, but really age-related diseases and the problem of people dying prematurely from things that they're not supposed to die from at the age of 50, 60, whatever, is the biggest problem that society has. So it's not really about living to 200 years. It's about kind of optimizing even what we have in terms of the lifespan that would be uninterrupted, suddenly uninterrupted by something that we can either prevent or treat in the early phase, etc. So I think that this is the industry of the most added value. And third, I mean, define how this actually affects my interest. So I do have this very weird mixture, okay, of having looked at the field from all possible angles. I've looked at it as a founder, I've looked at it as an investor, and unfortunately or fortunately, I've looked at it as a patient as well. So technically speaking, I'm a rare disease patient on the neurodegenerative side, right? So I know how it feels to actually lose some of the functions, right? Suddenly lose some of the functions due to a degenerational process. And what I can assure you is that you don't want to go there. Because society, I mean, we simply don't think about these things when we have everything kind of everything working correctly. But we're all going to be there, and I felt it, and I felt it at the age of 27. So I can say that it's no good as well. So that of course brings, I guess, additional, I wouldn't say motivation, but additional perspective on why we should spend time on what we're spending time on.
Would you like to share what the condition was, or is it too personal?
It's not, it would not, no, it's not too personal. I mean, I've talked about it from the stage, and I think that with all the rare diseases and especially neurodegenerative diseases, it is very important to talk about those. A, to raise awareness. B, to remind people that there are considerable cohorts of patients among us that actually have conditions of different levels of severity. And it is kind of unfair not to notice it as a problem. Okay. And this goes deep into how we allocate budgets for healthcare and how we treat these patients and yada yada. We will not go there. Look, you can think about it. There is a complicated name to it, but you can think about it as an autoimmune condition, which is similar to multiple sclerosis, but with a different antibody. Okay, so there is a different antibody which is much rarer. I think the incidence rate is 1 in 1.2 million. But the kind of the mechanism of action is pretty much similar to MS. You still get your myelin destroyed. You can end up. It can be a monophase. It can be a recurring one. You can end up with disability. You can get lucky and kind of bounce out of it with minimal damage. So things differ from patient to patient, but yeah, it's kind of in the MS type of mechanism of action side.
Mm. And how are you coping with it now? Is it more of recurring
Look,
or?
I'll put it this way. So I can run a sub 3 hour marathon, right? Which I think puts me comfortably somewhere in the upper bracket for males of my age. But I mean, you always with this is, by the way, very important. So whenever you talk about MS patients or any other neurodegenerative patients, what you should realize is that even if the person looks fine, he or she is living in a totally different reality when it comes to managing all the damage. So even if we're not talking about the recurring disease with these things, it's about old damage management, and old damage can be essentially burned down peripheral nervous system in certain parts of the body, or certain motion or motoric disabilities that never recovered, yada yada. So in my case, I had my own kind of regimen of how to restore some of the things, kind of get them back and get the body back on track. They will not work for everyone. My answer was actually vigorous levels of physical activity. Interestingly enough, because neurodegenerative patients need to be immunosuppressed. So, and you can achieve immunosuppression with drugs, corticosteroids, for example, or you can achieve immunosuppression if you look in the studies where they look at immune cell levels, for example, of professional athletes. And I used to be a semi-professional athlete when I was a younger kid. You'll see that everyone is immunosuppressed. So when the guy finishes running a marathon, his immune levels are like somewhere in the basement. So you can achieve the similar effect without actually corticosteroids and killing your adrenal glands. So I did this. All right, and that also helps you to recover. That also helps you with kind of small motoric kind of exercises and getting body back into shape. But then again, it will not work for everyone. So can't claim that I've found the key there. And then there is diet. There is a whole bunch of supplementation, etc. I don't eat sugar. I've never smoked in my life. I've never consumed alcohol in my life, actually, which is funny. So I'm a non-drinker for 32 years, technically speaking. A lot of things, but yeah, the bottom line is, whenever you or any of your listeners talk about an MS patient or any other neurodegenerative patient, always keep in mind that he or she is constantly managing some sort of anal damage or living in pain 24/7, not depending on the drugs that the person is on. So, like, give such patients some credit, because they actually deserve credit.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that maybe you can see, you can't really, because I think a lot of people in your age and in my and Patrick's age still, I mean, we're around 50, we can still, most of us can still think of death as or chronic disease as something that will happen at some time, but we don't have to think about that now, right? So I guess when you say that it could be beneficial, at least in terms of investing in longevity companies or knowing what's needed, that a disease as harrowing as it can be beneficial in that way, right?
Yeah, again, that's not the that's not the reason to get it, right? To try to squeeze any benefits out of it. But it is actually a very interesting, I mean, somewhat evolutionary concept, I guess, as well. Because if you think about it, when you wake up, you don't think about you being mortal, right? So you don't think about your own mortality. You think about all the other kind of everyday things, starting from washing your car, ending up with buying a house, or reading a book, whatever. And it also allows you to create, right? We are here doing a podcast, which is a form of creation in a way, because you're not occupied 100% of your time. You're not occupied with your own mortality, right? You kind of take everything you have as given. I think you wake up, you function, whatever. And that fundamentally is fundamentally different from how an animal would essentially live its life, right? Because with an animal, everything is basically spinning around survival. Uh, you know, so I think it's a very interesting kind of evolutionary concept of how we functionally acknowledge that we're mortal, like you would agree that you're mortal, most probably, right? But it's not that you really understand it in terms of it affecting your everyday life.
Not going to spend all of our podcast talking about background, but I'm just curious because I was interviewing Alex Shavorankov the other day, and
Hmm.
so he's also from Latvia.
He
Is
is,
there
yeah.
a big longevity scene in Latvia, or is this just some big circumstance that I'm now talking to two people from Latvia
There's,
in a few days'
there
time?
is there there is a circumstance. I mean, there is and there is not. So Gary is also from Latvia. Ilya is also from Latvia. So all three co-founders of LongeVC are actually, we were born in Latvia and raised in Latvia. Alex was also born here, and frankly speaking, Alex and Gary used to go to the same school together. So they know each other from essentially from childhood, from teenage years, right? So it is an interesting coincidence, but it's sort of it's more stems from the fact that we know each other through Gary, in a way, than from the fact that there is a booming longevity scene in Latvia. Most probably not. Although it is catching up. There is quite a bit of research, or rather longevity medicine type of activity, happening in one of the research hospitals here. And a lot of the young scientists and young MDs are actually very interested in becoming longevity physicians. We do have the Latvian, the Baltic Longevity Association, that was recently founded here. So that already engages in some activities, does the first conferences, kind of popularizes the concept. Yeah, so there is stuff happening, but still not a hotspot.
So I looked at your webpage, and it says that LongeVC is investing for an ageless future.
Yeah,
Uh,
correct.
how do you define an ageless future? What do you mean by that?
So there is, if you want to dive deeper, into this, we need to hold a much more detailed conversation in what we think longevity industry actually is, right? As a VC. So if we have some time to spend on that, I can provide you with context. So look, we think that there are fundamentally two camps, okay, in the industry. One camp says let's cure aging, right? So aging is the root cause of everything. The other camp says, let's be more pragmatic and let's go disease by disease. So let's adopt the age-related disease focus. So the second camp says we ditch radical life extension hypothesis, or the called geroscience ideological hypothesis for the time being, because we're not there yet, we're not ready, and we go disease by disease. So we belong to the second category, right? Um, as much as I would like to believe and would like to, so there are two hats of me, right? So one is the enthusiast hat. The enthusiast hat would say that is absolutely great. So we defy aging. Age-related diseases never happen, right? I mean, we stop aging, cancer never happens. Full stop. That's a win. In reality, as a VC and as someone who looks at how drug development cycles work and how new targets are developed, and molecule candidates, we're in this second category. So we'll look at longevity industry as an effort to solve, in a disease modifying way, to solve the major killers and kind of the major suspects that actually take people away prematurely. And we're talking again about kind of trivial, quote unquote, things such as cancer, such as neurodegeneration, such as cardiovascular diseases, metabolic diseases, etc. But let's not solve them or relieve symptoms. Let's try to understand how to act on them in a disease modifying way. And then, as a side effect of you understanding how to act on them in a disease modifying way, you will also get a much broader understanding of what are the underlying mechanisms of why this thing actually happened in the first place. So, theoretically, if you go disease by disease, step by step, at some point you will be able to sum all these efforts together and essentially come up with, well, some sort of a basis of knowledge for your first longevity drug or anything. I mean, you can call it whatever you like, right? But something that would actually result in either radical life extension or, in totally stupid language, making a perfectly fine human being even finer, younger, healthier, whatever, right? So without a specific disease, only by understanding why these things happen in the first place. And I think it's a bit arrogant to say all of this is not important, let's cure aging, and then biotech can deal with cancers and whatever, we're not interested, right? Because realistically speaking, we still don't know why Alzheimer's happens, why Parkinson's happens. I mean, there is nothing disease modifying. We're still kind of poking around in the dark, right? So there are things to do on the very pragmatic side of things. So in our case, for an ageless future, we do associate age and aging with the accumulation of damage, which leads to specific, potentially death-causing conditions. Okay, so with us as an investor, we are absolutely focused on health span versus lifespan. So for us, lifespan is a bit of a byproduct of health span, right? And even if we hypothesize that the lifespan kind of remains the same, right? Let's say whatever, 90 years. I'm just making things up at this point. So 90 years. We want to make sure that your quality of life is maximized up to 90 years. And it's not significantly reduced in the last decade, and you basically feel like you don't want to live this life anymore, but you still have some years in you, right? So that's the concept, to be completely frank. So we're not investing in magic pills. I really think that we should kind of adjust our understanding of what the longevity therapeutic is at all, like at least in today's reality, right? So yeah, we're on the pragmatic side, and this is what ageless future means for us. It's maximizing health span and reducing these risks then can kill you prematurely, right? Which are associated with age, as we know.
I get that you probably need to be pragmatic about and realistic about what has to be done, but I think that sometimes it's a little bit damaging to have this debate at all, because we're really, I think, striving for the same thing, which is instead of talking about a lifespan, we could say that we want to live as long as possible in as good health as possible. And I think that maybe most people could agree with that definition. How do you feel about that?
I think most people don't realize what's out there in terms of life extension at all. B, I think when we talk most people, we should talk about whether society level radical life extension is even possible in any sort of foreseeable future, and the answer is no, it is not. Because so far, all the radical life extension jumps, or kind of expected lifespan jumps, were happening because we either or declines, we either engaged in an absolutely stupid activity of killing one another in very huge quantities, and I'm talking world wars, right? Or we actually progressed in treating things that were killing us prematurely, and that is, thank you, vaccination. We're no longer having things like polio and not dying from Spanish flu and whatever. So you get my drift, right? So realistically, there was this paper, by the way, everyone is raging about right now, which is I think it's called Implausibility of Radical Life Extension. Actually, in 21st century, and that goes severely against the whole neuroscience hypothesis, which says, let's cure aging. I think that whoever is courageous enough to get on the stage and start shouting that health span extension or dealing with age-related diseases is not important, and we need to work on defying aging, needs to spend a day in a cancer ward. Okay, so spend a day in a cancer ward, pick any head and neck surgery, breast surgery, whatever. You'll see things, right, which will eventually make you change your paradigm of thinking tremendously, right? And then if it's not good enough for you, you can go out there and you can actually explain to these people that, well, we cannot help you at this point of time, but we're working on defying aging, so maybe in 200 years, this cancer ward will be empty. So yeah, I mean, look, again, I'm approaching this from a very somewhat radical, I guess, point of view, right? But I think that a longevity industry needs a reality check, and the reality check is this what I've just described.
That's interesting, because I'd say that you could just as easily go to a retirement home and talk to people that are about to die because they're over 90, and say that, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you guys, because we are in the process of taking care of other stuff in the meantime. But
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that in a way that we're probably talking about, I think sometimes we actually share the same goals, but there has been this artificial debate between health span and lifespan. Of course, we should. I mean, the sooner we can eradicate cancer, the better. Of course, these two often go hand in hand. But okay, let's put that aside for now and just focus on what have you been investing in? Can you talk me through what your focus
the
is?
logic.
I think you have like 3 arms that you are focusing on.
Yeah, so the first fund, I will be talking about the first fund because the second fund is not yet investing, right? Second fund is going to be is going to have a slight shift in the investment strategy, but not a radical one. So with the first fund, we kind of focused around three major pillars. Very simple: therapeutics, diagnostics slash prevention, and longevity infrastructure, or things that we call longevity infrastructure. Now, with therapeutics, we focus on age-related diseases, as I've already mentioned. Now, there is a caveat to that. It doesn't mean that we're not looking at longevity tech. We are. But what we're doing is we're looking at longevity tech that is finding its footing in a specific disease domain. Because as a VC, it is very important to, I mean, everyone loves platform technologies or like fundamental science, which is very promising. The problem is, whenever you want to prove your point, you need to talk the FDA language, right? And when you need to talk the FDA language, you need endpoints to measure, you need a disease indication to go after, the list goes on, right? So you need the disease anyway. And we are very excited about a bunch of things happening in the longevity industry. Epigenetic reprogramming being one of them, of course. I mean, several players already out there. We've invested in Turn.bio pretty early. Senescent cell clearance, Rubido is a great example, right? Where again we have fundamental longevity tech, but then instead of simply crying about the regulator not understanding us, we actually dig deeper and we try to identify specific mechanisms that are present in a specific disease area. And then we apply our fundamental technology in a specific disease area. And we have guys like Rubido or Turn.bio or, a bunch of other folks that are actually pushing this through preclinical into IND into clinical. So we are very excited about these things and kind of longevity tech. Yeah.
Just a side note on Rubido, as long as we're talking about them, their name is actually an alchemist concept, and alchemy was, of course, the searching for the philosopher's stone and and being forever young.
Yeah.
So it's again, it's funny how we are in a way longing for the radical stuff, but yeah, in the meantime, we have to talk about the to please the FDA, right?
Can I come in here?
Yes, sure.
Can I make another side note? Well, I was thinking, has in any way this metformin study has that changed a little bit how FDA is looking at this? Because I think they were just saying that just look at general mortality rates here. And not specific diseases. Has that changed anything?
I think are of extreme importance. For the regulator to get acquainted of what can be actually measured if we are hypothesizing that aging or life expectancy can be an endpoint, right? And then it's actually creating the endpoints. So it's actually creating the basis for your call it longevity focused trials. Okay, for the I pardon my ignorance maybe in some terminology, but you get what I mean, right? So I think that sort of evidence creation is of extreme importance. Absolutely. And it is actually exciting that FDA is looking at this and kind of absorbing this, and because FDA actually, I mean, people tend to kind of argue and throw tomatoes at FDA, but realistically, they are a super flexible institution that is set up for a reason, right? So it's there to ensure safety, and the rules, the FDA rules, are there, well, because patients need to be safe at the end of the day, but they're super flexible and very very fast absorbing. So again, things like metformin trial for us as a VC. It does not yield any protectable intellectual property, at least at this point, right? So this is something that we cannot invest in. That is more of a turf for nonprofits and kind of more fundamental funding for science. Yet, again, in terms of methodology creation, absolutely splendid. I agree. So Peter, coming back to coming back to the therapeutic focus. So again, age-related diseases, Technology is finding their footing in specific disease domains, as well as more traditional, actually biotechy approaches, such as, for example, we have invested in the second generation of ADCs, antibody drug conjugates, right? Simply because it is very important in cancer, right? It can have a very transforming effect in how we treat certain types of cancer, right? The first generation of ADCs was a success. The second generation is a tremendous improvement over the first one because it can now pierce together multiple payloads, right? So again, potentially groundbreaking. So this is why we deployed. Now the second pillar is diagnostics and kind of personalized care / prevention. Now, this is where it gets tricky. So with diagnostics, when you're a venture capitalist, diagnostics, I think, are one of the most difficult companies to invest in, because there is a very limited amount of players in the market that can actually acquire your portfolio undertakings. Right. So with therapeutics, you have a very broad pool of potential acquirers. With diagnostics, it shrinks quite significantly. There's only a handful of companies that can buy these startups. So we have deployed in things which we think are actually like category defining. For example, we're early investors in the company called AOA Diagnostics. So they've managed to finally use blood for ovarian cancer detection, kind of stage 0, stage 1 ovarian cancer detection. Huge unmet need before, right? And sensitivity, specificity of any previous attempts was somewhere in the basement. So not significant for it to be a diagnostic. AOA has kind of cracked the code, now running clinical trials. And actually joined by LabCorp and Danaher in the last round, right? So things are going well for the company. So things like that. We've invested in a Swiss company called Precomb, where they've managed to kind of crack the process for quickly growing an organoid for a patient's tumor ex vivo, so outside of the patient, and then quickly testing personalized treatment combinations and measuring the tumor response and coming back to the patient with a personalized therapy selection. And all of that happens in like a week, right? With a very significant increase in response in the patient after this therapy was selected. Again, you can argue, is this longevity? Not in a ideological sense of the word, I guess, but it does provide a significant kind of boost into the treatment regimen of existing age-related diseases. So in our universe, it is useful for society. At least. And then the third one is what we call longevity infrastructure. Now, behind this term, there is a very simple concept, and that is, if you want to design drugs with longevity benefit, or with the longevity dividend, as it is sometimes called, you need to figure out how to design those faster. You need to figure out how to find new targets, how to produce new molecule candidates. So you need to really crack the code on the R&D side, because right now it takes 10 years to get a drug to the market, right? Where the first 2 years is actually target candidate selection. So AI for drug discovery is there. We've done investments. We did deploy in several specifically targeted platforms. I mean, we have guys like Unnatural Products, for example, that are mimicking natural macrocycles. We have folks like Interface Biosciences that are looking specifically at so they isolate certain strains of bacteria from the gut. And they look at how the metabolites of these bacteria affect certain inflammation markers in the diseases that are still very hard to manage, such as inflammatory bowel disease, for example. It's still a huge unmet need, very drastic life quality decline for those patients. So things like that. We have, for example, invested in a company that does the Stanford spinout, actually. That was the first one to do single cell protein sequencing, Glyphic, right? So again, enabling tech, quite pragmatically, enabling tech that will allow us to, think of clinical work in a much faster, much more streamlined, much more iterative way versus as it is done right now.
And what about biomarkers of aging? Are you interested in that when it comes to longevity infrastructure?
We are, but we haven't invested in the company that is dealing with biomarkers of aging as of yet.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is
many companies doing that?
you see, there are, but the problem is that they're not really a VC fit case, right? Because very often there are companies that have a very interesting take on certain conditions with a very non-obvious way of how they try to find treatments for these conditions. I mean, there is a company called Pharma, for example, right? So they're using hibernating animals to understand certain processes, or how whatever, for example, weight management happens in an animal, right? And then they try to extrapolate it into the human application. There are such guys out there. When it comes to biomarkers of aging per se, it is very hard to grasp how this company will find its footing in terms of growing in value and essentially arriving at something tangible, something separable, and something sellable, which a VC needs, unfortunately or fortunately. So, no, we haven't invested yet, but there are people doing that.
Okay. Going back to the therapeutic side, what are you most excited about there?
Look, a lot of things, right? I mean, everything we invest in, we're excited about. We don't, if we have it in the portfolio, we are excited about it by default, right? There is no other way of the company ending up in the portfolio to begin with. I am excited about epigenetic reprogramming, as much of the buzzword it is. I think the ability to rewind cells to a younger state potentially opens up a horrendous amount of possibilities of tackling conditions that we were not able to tackle, or reversing certain damage that was done, right? And we're not only talking about like scar tissue or ophthalmological applications, which are still local deliveries, right? We're talking potentially somewhere down the line about systemic delivery, about for example, restoration of functions in neurodegenerative patients, in MS patients, which will bear tremendous effect, like bear tremendous fruits in these patient populations, which are huge, by the way. So that's one.
Ask you about Turn. Can I ask you
Yeah,
about Turn.bio specifically? I mean, they use
you can try.
somewhat. Yeah, I mean, they use somewhat unique approach to reprogramming, if I'm not mistaken, with mRNA.
Yeah, mRNA based.
mRNA. Yeah.
It's mRNA based. I can't share much, but what I can share is that it has found its application already in dermatology and ophthalmology, if I'm not mistaken, right? Which is a very good start. Again, for longevity companies, what's interesting, right? So dermatology seems to be the gateway, right? Because local delivery, low toxicity risks, right? So it's easier to actually prove your point locally if you're claiming any sort of rejuvenation or restoration of tissue, right? So Turn is still, of course, is yet to claim results in systemic delivery, I think, right? So it's not there yet. Yet in local delivery, they're pretty successful in these two programs that I've mentioned. Another thing, look, I've mentioned Rubido. I'm excited about Rubido. I think the senescent cell field has been in a huge. I mean, it was not it was not a crisis per se. It was an identity crisis, right? And I remember calling it out from the stage of AirDD. Like a year ago, I think it was AirDD 2023, and, and I got a lot of senescent cell companies kind of going after me and saying, no, 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 you're wrong. We're actually doing science here, and it was fine. But the point is, Rubido is one of the first ones who actually identified how to transform science into the disease indication, right? And they figured out what sort of that there are different types of senescent cells to begin with, right? Some are you don't need to touch them. Some are actually potentially affecting certain conditions, and again, they're going after dermatology. I think it was atopic dermatitis as one of their lead programs. So that is something I'm excited about. I am excited about the hypothesis of tackling systemic inflammation through gut, and that being a gateway for us to understand certain degenerative conditions. And again, I'm talking about neuro quite a lot, but it's not about it's not because I have the history with neuro. It's because it is one of the biggest kind of uncracked riddles so far. I mean, we just don't know why this happens, right? I mean, the whole amyloid hypothesis is just giving you peanuts. I mean, you don't modify the disease by clearing the amyloid plaque. So I think kind of modulating systemic inflammation through gut is another extremely exciting um, area, which has several layers of complexity. One layer of complexity is we have a portfolio company which is called Anibiome, right? So one level of complexity is introducing something that would maintain your gut health and then prevent certain things from happening on the consumer level. So we're not talking about a therapeutic or a systemic delivery, you know, in the hospital setting, but we're talking about dietary interventions or, you know, more basic stuff that is accessible to a wider population. And then the more complex layer is actually trying to deal with it in a proper kind of intervention hospital setting. Yeah, so things like that. By the way, I think that like whenever we're talking longevity as a holistic term, what I am very excited about is when founders come up with solutions that are elegant enough to package complicated science in something super accessible for masses to actually consume. I think that is an absolutely killer combination, right? And again, Ani is a great example, right? But not only. So what you are trying really to achieve is if you want to introduce the longevity concept into the masses and claim any sort of benefit across a wider population, not just a bunch of high net worth individuals going to, you know, a closed clinic, what you need to understand is how to do these interventions on a population scale, right? And speak in a language that is accessible to an average consumer, which is not the science language, it's a product language, yet be able to package your complicated science into it. And that takes elegance, right? So that takes elegance and that and ingenuity.
I'm thinking about GLP-1 agonists here.
Still a drug. GLP agonist is still a drug. You need to somehow, it's a great example though, but you need to somehow go one level down so that you can give people something that will not have side effects such as GLP, and GLP-1s do have side effects. I mean, you cannot just take them. I mean, whenever you wish. Some people do, but it's a very bad idea, right? So you need to go one level down and provide something universally working across a big cohort in population without significant side effects, but with some sort of a measurable health benefit. That's key. It's very hard to pull off, product-wise, science-wise, almost impossible. But some try.
What about a few other? If we're like talking about the hallmarks of aging here, we talked about clearing senescent cells, and we've talked about restoring the epigenome, which is partial reprogramming. W- do you invest in any other companies that addresses some of the other hallmarks? Like we have DNA damage, for example.
DNA damage we have not invested in. We have not invested in telomere telomere focused companies as well. The reason is always the same. No clear path into the clinic. That's it. I'm not saying that no one has it. I'm saying that the targets that we have looked at, and I think the first fund has looked at in 3 years, I think the most recent statistics is 2,600-ish, maybe 2,700 companies. And I'm talking companies, we have a big team. And I'm talking companies that we actually have looked at, not just filtered out immediately because they don't fit, but we spent some sort of even minimal time on them. Applicability, the actual path to clinic is of huge importance. In the very same way as people love to talk about platform tech, and people now love to talk about, and I think Alex maybe talked about this, I'm pretty sure. People love to talk about AI for drug discovery now, right? So back in the days in silico was one of the kind of, these rare beasts that was doing it. Right now, there are a ton of companies doing it. But whenever we see a platform tech company, one of the first items on the checklist is whether the company actually has or is planning to have their own pipeline, right? Whenever you're looking at companies that are simply going to sell their services to pharma, or even worse, to license their platform to pharma for pharma to play around with it, it's an absolute no-go, because that is a business model that has been destroyed already in the industry, right? It just doesn't work because pharma wants assets. And so you would always, if your platform is so cool, as you are claiming it to be, you will have your own assets, and you will have most promising targets kept to yourself and maybe developed in collaboration with someone, and then you would license out the other ones, right? And this is how you actually make money, and this is how you grow in value. And a similar story of how we validate things in therapeutics is with the hallmark of aging companies, for example, is one of the first items on the agenda is, does it have a therapeutic program? If it doesn't at all, then this is a turf for grants, for nonprofits, and we have a nonprofit longevity science foundation. I mean, funds basic fundamental longevity research, but it's not for VCs. That's it.
Yeah. So, what are you most preoccupied with these days? What has been the most important thing for you this year, and what do you look forward to during the next year?
Bringing value to our portfolio companies, because that does take time to actually work with them and do what we can. And we are using all of our resource network, scientific advisory board, to actually help them. And that is pharma partnerships, that is next round fundraisings, all the stuff that the startup actually needs. So we try to be useful. The second huge item on my agenda is, of course, Fund 2, right? Because we are now in an active fundraising phase for Fund 2. So that occupies quite a bit of my time as well. We are finalizing the Fund 1 investment period, so we're still going to deploy a few more new tickets. So there will be announcements coming from us soon. I mean, this year or very beginning of next year. But technically, the first fund ends its investment period in December 2024. So there is quite a lot of work to catch up on still, and a lot of kind of eyes to put a dot on. Yeah, so mostly operational, honestly, right? What we're trying to do is we're trying to really, with the capital that we have, we are trying to support what we think is most promising in certain areas. again, we're not the ultimate judge of what is most promising. You can survey other funds and they would most probably give you other things. But, this is how we harness the knowledge that we have access to, and this is how we kind of try to catch the trend. So it's mostly operational things, and maximizing the value of what we have and what we're doing.
I'm curious about the structure of your business. Who can invest in you, and the companies that you invest in? How much influence do you have over those companies?
Well, that depends. I mean, the first fund and the second fund are fully privately funded, right? So we have private capital, private LPs, and these are single multifamily offices, high net worth individuals. So like a pretty traditional kind of LP lineup for a VC. So that's that, and this means that we don't have any restrictions. So we don't have any restrictions geographically, and thesis wise, we're actually pretty flexible. So that's pretty much the gist of it. The first fund has deployed tickets ranging from €500,000 to 1.5 million euros, because the first fund is in Europe. The second fund is a US vehicle, and we're ramping up. So we will be deploying initial tickets. The median would be around 5 to 7 million. So later stage, mostly. Most of the fund portfolio will be later stage. Think kind of rounds A, B, or post IND, essentially. But we're still reserving, and this is interesting, so we're still reserving a small fraction, 15 to 20% of the portfolio, to be deployed in early stage, promising, kind of visionary type of longevity science, because we do have access to these research groups, and we are in the situation where longevity is emerging as a new blockbuster category, potentially, of drugs and interventions, and we want to be there early. So we are reserving a smaller amount to be able to deploy in early stages and then hold it for pretty much the whole lifetime of the fund, and hopefully get it to some sort of result. When it comes to the influence that we have, well, it depends on the round, right? If the round is smaller, sometimes we do have a board seat. If the round is bigger, we would not have a board seat. We'll just be in the investor pool. We're very often invited because of our due diligence capacity, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so whenever you are an investor, whenever you are in the cap table or a safe note holder, you would always provide everything that you have to the company, board or not, right? So here's the resource, here are the introductions, you can have those, because right now we're basically rowing in the same boat with you, right? And everyone is interested in the boat actually reaching some sort of a destination. So that's that. The second fund will have more board seats, most probably, but then again, value wise, doesn't really make much difference.
Does it ever happen that you have to tell them, look, we think you should focus more on this particular avenue or research or
It does.
product?
It does, but not research, but rather we sometimes step in with a suggestion of how a certain partnership should be tackled, or why go after this partnership and not that one, and how to preserve maybe flexibility in the future. Because if it's just, look, so a VC working in a venture capital fund gives you, on the one hand, it can make you a bit shallow in terms of, being able to talk about a lot of things, but not being able to go super deep into one, right? But then it also gives you a horizon. So it gives you a perspective, because you see a lot of examples around you, and you see the ones that worked and didn't work. And if your analytical skills are a bit above zero, you can really understand why, this was successful and this sort of failed, even if the input variables were roughly similar. And this is what we try when we spot something like this. This is what we try to, of course, to contribute to portfolio companies. But that being said, a VC is not in the business of running someone else's business, which means they're still founders. It's still their company, so we can suggest. We can suggest in a slightly maybe noisier way, but we cannot, we don't overtake businesses. It's not our job.
Tell me more about the due diligence that you do. I mean, for an outsider like me, it seems that every venture capitalist would be doing really thorough due diligence, but you pride yourself on being one of the best in that category. So can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, there's no secret sauce. Look, so most venture capital funds. Okay, venture capital 101. First and foremost, a venture capital fund runs on management fees. Right, so management fees is something that you're using as a fuel, as a resource to pay your team and maintain the whole thing. Management fees are also used to pay salaries to managing partners as well. Now, so you cash in a certain amount of money every year, and you need to spend it internally wisely, and you kind of choose what you want to spend it on. When we started LongeVC, the goal was to get the best team, the most capable, scientifically most capable DD team possible, which meant that we spent much more of our own money than we had, especially from management fees, especially in the very beginning. B, we don't run salaries for managing partners in LongeVC. So all the resource that we're spending it on the team. We're spending on the deal team, which is now, we have a separate fellowship program as well in the US, and the team is in between US and Europe. So I think it's actually more than 10 people with fellows as of now in the deal team, which is exceptionally large for the first fund of that size, right? So that's the first thing. B, we were able to put together an extremely capable scientific advisory board, which actually works with us. Which means that our deal team constantly communicates with scientific advisory board, gets their opinion on the tech, on the science, any sort of market perspectives. Scientific advisory board members very often refer deals to us. This is how we get into closed allocations, et cetera, et cetera. So on top of that, what we have is we have a network of external KOLs that we have built throughout the years. We have built relationships with. So in total, we're looking at, I think, like 13. I might be wrong, but plus minus one. Permanent scientific advisory board members, more than 50 external KOLs that we tap into when we need it. None of our decisions can be taken without 2 to 3 KOL opinions, different KOL opinions in the investment memo. Yeah, I mean, it's just being thorough. There is no secret sauce. The secret sauce is not being greedy, not spending everything on partner salaries, investing everything you have on the team in people, because people are the name of the game in VC anyway, and understanding that you can attempt to be an expert. You can never actually be an expert, but you can attempt to be an expert in a very specific niche, laser focused domain. Because the biggest curse for a biotech fund is to be a catch-all fund, right? You can never ever achieve depth of due diligence if you are a simple catch-all biotech fund where, today we're doing a bit of fitness apps, and then tomorrow we're doing a bit of cancer research, and then the day after tomorrow we're going after diabetes. It doesn't work that way. It is impossible to hold an army of people that is capable of actually assessing all of these at the same level of quality. So you kind of focus, and then again there's always this funny I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect in psychology, where there is a relationship with person's intellectual capacity and evaluation of his or her own knowledge. Where the smarter someone is, smarter, quote unquote, the more he or she acknowledges the limitations of his or her knowledge. Whereas the dumber someone is, the more self-confident he or she appears to be, right? So the key here is to always acknowledge the limitations, I think, and try to understand what sort of key people you need to surround yourself with. And this is how you get good due diligence. I'm not saying it's the best, but we think it's one of the best in the industry for sure.
Are there any ways to measure that, to measure outcomes, because you're doing
Performance,
this great due diligence? Yeah.
performance, death rate on the portfolio. How many companies have you written off? It's been 3 years for LongeVC. An average biotech fund would have written off around 30% of the portfolio, give or take, right? We have zero. So we have zero write-offs on the portfolio. We have nobody has invalidated their science. So everyone is progressing with clinical milestones and commercial milestones being met. Some are progressing slower than we would have wanted them, but that's the market risk, right? Or the execution risk. It's not the science risk. So, but everyone is alive. Everyone is signing up for new pharma partnerships, raising new rounds, and kind of delivering on a good multiplier across the portfolio. So, so far, we've been pretty satisfied.
What is your greatest success story here?
We're yet to create one. I think we're yet to create one. They're all great. Look, again, everything that you see, if you go longevc.com or any of our press releases, everything that you see we're excited about, right? So I think this is us being able to support these people, quite literally. I'm not being dramatic here. Us being able to identify these teams and to support these teams, that's a success story altogether. Because whenever I talk about our portfolio, I am not ashamed of a single deal that we have done. Okay, everyone is doing something to actually potentially fundamentally change the life quality in the society in a specific disease domain, etc. So, if we define success story by achieving a huge exit, I mean, we're yet to create one, right? But I think they're all kind of success stories in their own right.
Do they come to you, or do you identify them?
That depends. We rarely invest in deals from the market. So we don't go into like startup competitions, for example, and source from there. And then in biotech, technically speaking, if the deal is on the market for long and the round is not filled, there is always a very slight chance that people are just not witnessing something extraordinary happening, right? And you have a chance to kind of, to find it and drag it in your portfolio. But very often it's not really exciting. So the most exciting deals are actually handed out and carved in allocations. So you get invited by your co-investors, by your scientific advisory board members, by you having a relationship with a research institution that is about to spin out something, and then you have a pro rata right in the following rounds because you're already an investor. So it's a bit of an insider game. Sometimes, very often founders reach out to us. Sometimes we even invest in these deals. But the vast majority is allocations and kind of other deal access instruments.
How do you view the overall VC landscape for longevity, if we're going to stick with that term? I mean, not biotech in general, but just longevity focused.
And then again, define what's the difference between biotech and longevity, right? I mean, it's so I once did a joke on stage. I don't know if people actually liked it or not. That longevity, like longevity seems to be like biotech industry once woke up in the morning and decided it needs to have a purpose in life, right? So that's what longevity industry actually is. Like it's biotech wanting to have a purpose in life, so like a bigger purpose. But look, I think there are very few true longevity funds out there in terms of being able to actually evaluate neuroscience or any sort of life extension hypotheses whatsoever. Because there are very few KOLs that are actually potent in that space. There are even fewer fund managers that have deployed capital in that space. There are even fewer deals that have actually yielded superior returns in that space, which means that longevity industry as of now, it is very hypey, right? Because everyone is talking about it. But then pragmatically, numbers wise, you are looking at a very high barrier, knowledge, the intellectual barrier to be able to perform and actually evaluate those deals and understand whether there is, there is meat on the bones. You need to be an absolute optimist by nature, because you're still looking at the very beginning of the industry where the amount of success stories is not that high. We have some. I mean, we have stuff like BioAge's IPO and whatever, but if you compare it to general traditional biotech and cancer companies and whatever, it's nothing. So there is still a lot of success stories to create to lure more capital into the space, because capital follows success stories. Whenever people see that there is money being made, then they join in larger numbers. And it's also your ability to get the right people, because there are very few KOLs out there, to get these people to work with you and essentially help you out, help you identify the right deals, etc. So it is very hypey on one end, but then on the flip side, it is extremely hard to create added value in that industry as an investor as of now. And this is why we have a very limited amount of actually truly longevity funds out there. A lot of funds are calling themselves longevity because I guess it kind of helps fundraising, but in reality, it is still pretty challenging and the barrier is high. On the other note, but by the way, I'm just going to add to that. So that also creates a responsibility in a way, because it's a young industry, and industries grow because of collaboration, not competition, really. So existing longevity funds that have the capacity to evaluate all of the stuff happening actually have the responsibility to share the deals and bring in more generalist biotech investors as co-investors and share the due diligence results and kind of educate them, which might sound like a non-profit activity, which it very often is. But this is how you create pools with people that are potentially interested but not capable of doing it on their own. Right, so this is how you indoctrinate people, and it is a responsibility to do it, because otherwise, if we just stick to our own kind of small pockets with money and just try to multiply that money and not share the knowledge out, we will grow, but it's going to be a much slower, much more painful, and much less fun process. So yeah, sorry, Peter, I interrupted you.
No problem at all. I think you might have also answered my question, because I was going to ask, I mean, if we get success stories and so there will be more interest in the field, but I was going to ask you if knowledge would still be a bottleneck, but I think you might have alluded to that right now.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you need to share knowledge and spread knowledge. By the way, look, I think even on the KOL, even on the KOL kind of side, there are a lot of people that have contributed to the industry immensely, right? Guys like Aubrey, for example.
Sergey, for our listeners, KOL
key opinion leader.
for? Yes.
Key opinion leaders. Yeah. So guys like Aubrey, for example, right? Who was the first one, or one of the first ones, who actually started to talk about aging and longevity and life extension in terms that are accessible to an individual who doesn't possess any prior background educationally in biotech or in molecular biology, for the matter. So that is also very important, right? So not the venture capital, like organizational level, but also the individual level, because talking about something in accessible language is usually a sign that you understand. the topic thoroughly, right? Whenever you try to talk about something in a very complicated way, in an attempt very often to look smart, that very often means that you don't really understand what you're talking about. So yeah, it has many levels in terms of how to popularize it, but I think we're getting.
So looking ahead, 10 years into the future, 20 years into the future, in your view, how will this progress? I think so. I guess you think that maybe we're going to see more of a disease-related focus where we tackle the disease one by one, and then as we go, we get more knowledge, and then we can go for the maybe bigger prize here.
Yeah, I would honestly, as of now, like, Tuesday, 8th of October, 2024, I would be pro this version that you've just mentioned. Look, I kind of segment the longevity mentally into three major kind of horizons, right? Where one is longevity happening now. All of your smartwatches, Fitbits, Garmin's, take a sip of water, do some sit-ups, do a run, yada yada. So all this self-consciousness, us understanding that being healthy is good, healthy lifestyle is fashionable, whatever floats your boat, but trying to be healthy, right? And basic self-care and basic prevention. People doing colonoscopy or breast cancer screening, all of this, that's longevity now, right? Okay, very basic. Then you have longevity tomorrow, like 5 to 10 years from now, and that is age-related diseases. I think that is disease-modifying treatments for age-related diseases. And then you have the futuristic part of longevity, which is largely theoretical as of now, and that is your cryonics, that is your radical life extension, that is longevity drugs, pure longevity drugs, where even longevity drugs, I think, have like several stages to them, where I think the most obtainable longevity drug, or what you can call longevity drug, is a drug that will be simply effective across several disease categories, right? And only then you will achieve like the 2.0 longevity drug, which will make you younger or reverse a biological age in a systemic way, right? So all of this is kind of this 20-ish year horizon. Head transplants, for example, as well, I guess belong in that category. So uh, yeah, I mean, I would stick to the theory that we will need, we like it or not, we will need to go disease by disease, understand the underlying mechanisms. Through this, understand aging piece by piece, kind of as a puzzle being put together, and then eventually sum up our findings. Yeah. Might not sound very romantic. Does sound like something that does not yield, longevity escape velocity concept to come to life in the next 5 years, but I think that is what it is as of now. Radical life extension, as of now, I think is impossible because so far we have done it by tackling obvious issues. The next obvious issue is dealing with age-related diseases, right? I mean, we've tackled vaccinations, and we stopped killing each other in vast, although we're still very bad at it, unfortunately. But yeah, now it's age-related diseases. I don't think we can jump over it and just, plug right into a radical life extension.
So, which age-related diseases do you foresee that we will make the biggest strides against first?
Metabolic cardiovascular. Um, I'm rooting for Alzheimer's, but I don't think we'll see a disease-modifying treatment in Alzheimer's in the next 5 years for sure. I'm just being realistic here. Metabolic, we're doing. I think we're making great progress. cancer, look, cancer again is a very catch-all term. It's like longevity, right? So like what sort of cancer we're talking about. What is clear is that pharma industry is in a very, very tight spot right now. Existing patents are expiring. Existing blockbusters are essentially stopping yield exclusive income. The last huge breakthrough in cancer, for example, I think was PD-1. So, pembrolizumab, and nivolumab after, but doesn't really matter, right? So Keytruda, and the rest, which is I think 2014. So everyone is on the hunt for the next blockbuster drug category. As of now, everyone is on the hunt. Pharma has the money to acquire things, but the pipelines are drying out. The capacity for internal innovation is very limited. So I'm hesitant to give you the exact number, to be honest, but I think it was around 13% of actual innovation and therapeutics that pharma is responsible for in-house. All the rest is actually acquired. So all the rest is startups, is biotechs, IP that is getting acquired. Only 13-ish, but I'm afraid to give you the wrong number, but pretty low, is done in-house. So every therapeutic pretty much that you get right now, or most of the therapeutics that you get right now, if you encounter an age-related disease, A, was developed initially by a small biotech. B, most probably was supported by an absolute optimist of a venture capitalist somewhere in the beginning. But that's true, right? And that's kind of the beauty of the business. And then this effect, of course, dilutes, but someone actually believed in it like 20 years, 10 years before. So yeah, I think it's in that order. I would not bet for Alzheimer's to be solved very soon, unfortunately. But we'll see. That being said, look, if you go into like basic stuff of how to lower your biological age, what you will find very basic lifestyle interventions. Right, so there are a lot of things that you can do for you, like today, like in the next hour, that are actually beneficial for you, and this is something that we should not really forget as well. So on top of finding cures for cancer and doing all this fancy pharma stuff, what we need to focus on is longevity medicine, which is pretty much personalized preventive medicine, right? If you kind of demystify it a bit. We need to focus on longevity medicine being actually accessible to people, not being just the high net worth individual territory, but being accessible in public hospitals, being integratable in public hospitals as a framework of care, which is something that we're lacking as of now, right? And we also need to essentially work on ways of how to communicate with the society. A very good example of how this is broken is any cancer screening program nationally. Take breast cancer screening, right? It's awful, right? So the actual methodology of getting people to screen, of getting women to screen after 50, for example, is absolutely awful. Sending out letters or not explaining why this is needed and what are the risks, etc. So the whole thing is broken communication wise. And it's not that we cannot prevent breast cancer. We can, if we actually find it very early. But what we're very bad at is simply inviting people to prevent it, right? So there are so many levels that we can actually work on as of now, to increase health span, lifespan as a consequence, but to increase health span really, and not even going into this high world of creating cancer therapeutics. Very basic day to day.
Yeah, sure. That's also something that we've been talking about before, the need for a better infrastructure and ecosystem just around the healthcare system today, that it should be based on more prevention and done with simple measures, but it's not still. So yeah, that's true. Okay, Sergey. I mean, thank you so much for coming on to talk with us today about the VC space in longevity, even if that's a loaded term, as we've learned by now. It's going to be really interesting to follow you and see how your companies are doing in the next few years.
Yeah, I think that was exciting. I really hope that was useful. I think I really hope that it will resonate with your listeners, at least some of your listeners. Um, yeah, thank you for having me, Peter, Patrick. That was fun.